Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Today we're going to discuss 50 more events after the Harry Potter story came to an end. If you haven't seen part 1 already, go and watch that after. Link in the pinned comment and description. Like I mentioned in my first video, each section covers multiple points, which amounts to around 50 bits of info altogether. And as with the first video, these details come from canon sources like the epilogue, interviews, and extended Pottermore writings from J.K. Rowling. And if you're more curious about what happened to specific individual characters after the war, then be sure to check out my other video, What Happened to These 100 Characters After the War. Anyway, let's dive into it. Voldemort's soul is left in limbo. When Voldemort dies, the story makes it clear that simple death was never really the point. Voldemort feared death more than anything, and nearly every major decision he made was driven by the desire to escape it. Horcruxes, murder, domination, and even the rejection of his own humanity all trace back to that obsession. But in trying to conquer death, he destroys the very thing that would allow him to move beyond it. By repeatedly tearing his soul apart through murder and Horcrux creation, Voldemort leaves himself spiritually mutilated. What remains after his final defeat is a broken fragment trapped in limbo, powerless and unable to move on. We get a symbolic glimpse of this in King's Cross, where Harry sees the small, flayed, childlike creature whimpering beneath a bench. Dumbledore makes it clear that the thing is beyond help, as it represents the result of choices already made. The ending is fitting because it turns Voldemort's greatest ambition into his greatest punishment. Harry and Dudley finally move beyond the past. Amidst the ongoing war with Voldemort and his Death Eaters, very little is revealed about the Dursleys after they pack up and head off. But there are a few clues in the form of a segment from the book and a deleted scene from the film which suggests that there may be a future for Harry and Dudley. The scene depicts a moment of redemption for Dudley who, in an effort to make things right with Harry, shakes his hand just before they depart. Harry's bully, the boy who tormented him for years, finally made an effort to set things straight, and this single act did wonders for their relationship in the years to come. It's later revealed by J.K. Rowling that, despite Dudley's years of abuse toward Harry, they were eventually on Christmas card terms, sometimes visiting each other during the holidays. While quite hard to believe, Dudley did eventually develop into a decent man, very much unlike the tyrannous force of nature that he embodied in his youth. Dudley even eventually got married and had a family of his own, raising 2 Muggle children. Harry and Dudley would still see each other enough to be on Christmas card terms, but they would visit more out of a sense of duty and sit in silence so that their children could see their cousins. George keeps Weasley's Wizard Wheezers alive. Fred Weasley's death is one of the most painful losses in the Battle of Hogwarts because it didn't just claim one of the most beloved characters in the series, it also broke a lifelong pair. Fred and George were almost inseparable. Their humour, identity and success were built together. So one of the biggest questions after the war is what becomes of George and what becomes of the world they created. The answer is that George continues. He keeps Weasley's Wizard Wheezers running, preserving one of the most joyful places in the wizarding world. That carries real weight in the years after the war. The wizarding community had just come through fear, loss, and Voldemort's control of public life. Places that brought people together, made them laugh, and reminded them how to enjoy life again would have mattered far more than a joke shop might seem on paper. The business also keeps Fred's memory alive. It could never feel the same without him, and George would have known that better than anyone. But continuing the shop doesn't mean ignoring what happened or pretending the loss was smaller than it was. It means choosing to carry forward something they built together rather than letting tragedy be the final word. George lost the brother and business partner who had shaped his entire adult life, but he still found a way to keep going. Luna finds the perfect career. Luna Lovegood spent much of her time at Hogwarts being treated as an outsider. Students called her loony, hid her things, and wrote her off because she spoke differently and believed in things most people laughed at. But Luna was never foolish or unaware. If anything, she was often one of the few people paying attention properly. She understood grief after losing her mother, read people well, stayed calm under pressure, and regularly cut through the noise around her with simple observations that others missed. So when we later learn that Luna becomes a magizoologist, it feels completely believable. Her whole character was built around curiosity and a fascination with the unknown, and while other people dismissed unusual creatures or unexplained ideas immediately, Luna was always willing to look closer first. That mindset would be incredibly useful in a field built on exploration, patience, and discovery. What I like about Luna's ending is that the traits that made her seem odd in the school corridor became strengths in adult life. Snape is honoured. Severus Snape's post-war legacy is one of the most debated parts of the entire series, because there's no simple way to frame it. His contribution to Voldemort's defeat was immense. For years he lived as a double agent under constant danger, fed information where it needed to go, protected Harry repeatedly without Harry knowing, and continued following Dumbledore's plan right up until his death. Without Snape, the war may have ended very differently. And once the truth came out, the role couldn't be ignored. After the war, Snape was formally honoured. His portrait was placed in the headmaster's office, and the wider wizarding world finally learned that the man many viewed as a Death Eater had in fact been working against Voldemort. At the same time, public recognition doesn't rewrite how he treated people. Snape could be cruel, humiliating, spiteful, and blatantly unfair, especially towards students who were children under his authority. Many of them experienced the real version of Snape long before they ever learned the hidden one, which is why the argument around him never really ends. Nevertheless, he was honoured, both formally with his own headmaster's portrait and with the name of Harry's child, Albus Severus. Fawkes leaves forever. Fawkes has one of the quieter endings in the series, but it's also one of the most meaningful. After Dumbledore is killed, we don't see Fawkes lash out or remain on Hogwarts as some permanent fixture of the castle. We hear him sing. Harry describes it as a phoenix song unlike any he had heard before, a grief-stricken lament carrying across the grounds after Dumbledore's death. Somewhere out in the darkness, a phoenix was singing in a way Harry had never heard before, a stricken lament of terrible beauty. And Harry felt, as he had felt about Phoenix Song before, that the music was inside him. Not without, it was his own grief turned magically to song that echoed across the grounds and through the castle windows. Not long after, the singing stops. Harry understands that Fawkes is gone and won't be returning. Rowling later explained that this was intentional. When Dumbledore died, something had to leave Hogwarts for good, and Fawkes was chosen to represent that loss. Dumbledore wasn't someone who could simply be replaced, and neither was the bond between him and his phoenix. Something had to leave the school for good when Dumbledore died, and I decided that would be Fawkes. Dumbledore was a very great and irreplaceable man, and the loss of Fawkes, and the fact that he was non-transferable, expresses this symbolically. Kreacher finds purpose. Kreacher doesn't make a great first impression. He's rude, bitter, and full of the old Black family's prejudice. Everything about him feels tied to Grimmauld Place and the worst parts of that house's legacy. But what makes the biggest change in Kreacher isn't magic or punishment, but how he's treated. Once Harry begins showing him basic respect, trusting him, and giving him something meaningful to do, Kreacher changes with it. He becomes loyal, committed, and willing to fight for the people who finally treated him as more than property. We see that clearly during the Battle of Hogwarts, when he leads the House Elves against the Death Eaters. It's one of the most unexpected moments in the battle, and one of the most satisfying. Later information suggests Kreacher continued serving at Hogwarts. He never becomes a completely different being, and the story doesn't pretend otherwise, but he does become proud and connected to something better than the house that shaped him. The Golden Trio become official legends. On Rowling's 2007 American book tour, she had a surprise for fans. As it turns out, one of the perks of destroying one of the most powerful dark wizards that ever existed is to have your face and accomplishments appear on your very own chocolate frog card. Harry's card says, the first and only known wizard to survive the killing curse, most famous for the defeat of the most dangerous dark wizard of all time, Lord Voldemort. Hermione's card says, the brightest witch of her age, who eradicated pro-pureblood laws and campaigned for the rights of non-human beings such as house elves. And Ron's card says, destroying the Horcruxes and subsequent defeat of Voldemort and revolutionizing the Ministry of Magic. For Ron, an ardent card collector, this was as good as it gets. Harry and Ginny build a family. One of the most meaningful parts of Harry's ending has nothing to do with defeating Voldemort or becoming an Auror. It's the fact that he finally gets what was denied to him for most of his life. A real family. Harry grew up isolated, neglected, and unwanted in the Dursley household. Home never really felt like home, so when he eventually marries Ginny Weasley, there is a deeper significance beyond romance alone. Ginny represents exactly the kind of family environment Harry had admired from the moment he first encountered the Weasleys, and that's why them ending up together is so perfect. The pair go on to have 3 children who we can see in the epilogue: James Sirius, Albus Severus, and Lily Luna. Harry chose to build his future around love, memory, and connection, rather than trauma, and that's exactly why the orphaned boy in the cupboard ends up surrounded by the very thing he lacked most: Petunia's hidden feelings. Harry Potter's relationship with his aunt Petunia Dursley involves a highly complex range of emotions. Petunia's deep-seated jealousy and resentment towards her magical sister Lily, Harry's mother, influence her treatment of Harry, leading to mistreatment and neglect. However, there are glimpses of responsibility and moments that hint at buried emotions, showcasing a more human side to Petunia. In The Cursed Child, it's stated that Petunia actually died at some point before Harry's son began attending Hogwarts. Shortly thereafter, Dudley returns a certain blanket to Harry, the same blanket that he was wrapped in when he was left at number 4 Privet Drive. This is the last thing I had from my mum. The only thing. I was given to the Dursleys wrapped in it. I thought it had gone forever, and then, when your great-aunt Petunia died, hidden amongst her possessions, surprisingly, Dudley found this, and he kindly sent it to me. And ever since then, well, anytime I've wanted luck, I've found it and just tried to hold it. This tells us that by the time Albus is a third year, Petunia had actually died, which is tragic in a weird sort of way, given that she likely never revealed her true affection for Harry. Despite her mistreatment of Harry for all those years, the fact that she kept the blanket in her possession shows a hidden sentimentality and possibly even a sense of regret. Ron and Hermione. Some relationships in the series are surprising. Ron and Hermione are not one of them. From early on, the tension is obvious. They argue constantly, irritate each other endlessly, and yet remain deeply tied together through every major event of their lives. And beneath all of that bickering was always loyalty and affection. After the war, they marry and have 2 children, Rose and Hugo, also seen in the epilogue. What makes their relationship work is balance. Hermione's intensity is grounded by Ron's humour and emotional instinct, while Ron is challenged to grow by Hermione's standards and intelligence. And by the time they finally end up together, they already know each other at their best and worst. George builds a family. George and Fred were the closest of brothers. They shared a beautiful friendship where they would spend every waking moment with one another. And, as you can imagine, after the loss of his brother and twin, George was a bit lost. The Wizarding War had ended and peace had returned, but he now faced a new struggle, life without his brother. But life must go on, which is why he decided to immerse himself in his work, going on to become quite successful. And after establishing a successful career, George decided to focus on his love life, developing a relationship with a fellow Gryffindor graduate by the name of Angelina Johnson. Angelina played a reasonably active role in the series, becoming a member of Dumbledore's army and also captaining the Gryffindor Quidditch team in her 7th year, which was also Harry's 5th year. George and Angelina ended up getting married and having children, but perhaps the most unusual thing about their relationship is that Angelina was actually Fred's ex. I'm not sure what the rules are surrounding dating your dead twin's ex-girlfriend, but it certainly sparked some controversy with fans. To make things slightly more unusual, one of their children was called Fred II, and their daughter was named Roxanne. This was a nice way to honour Fred, sure, but it probably would have been better if he didn't conceive said child with his ex. Luna finds love. I mentioned earlier that Luna ends up becoming a magizoologist, and it's for that reason that you probably won't be too surprised to hear when I drop the name of her future husband, Rolf Scamander. One of the most notable magizoologists in Harry Potter is Newt Scamander, who wrote Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. And interestingly enough, Luna actually went on to marry his grandson, Rolf. Rolf worked for the Daily Prophet and eventually went on to become a magizoologist himself. It's been expressed that for their wedding, Luna dressed in typical eccentric Luna fashion, sporting a rainbow dress and tiara with unicorn horns. Later on, sometime between the years 2008 and 2014, the pair had 2 sons, Lorcan and Lysander. Some fans were upset by this news, as many speculated that Luna and Neville would have been a good pair. However, Rowling had different plans for Neville. Neville and Hannah Abbott. This is an interesting one that sort of comes out of left field. Neville and Hannah are never really shown as being intimate with one another. To add to this, they were in different houses. Hannah was a half-blood witch that began studying at Hogwarts in the same year as Neville, but she ended up in Hufflepuff, and we of course know that Neville was in Gryffindor. However, there are a few connections that can be made between the two that potentially serve as reasons for them inevitably ending up together. First of all, both of them were in Dumbledore's army, so they had that going for them. Next, they shared herbology lessons together. This was made possible because Gryffindor and Hufflepuff students shared this class in their year. Neville excelled at herbology, which probably meant that his environment led to a more charismatic, confident Neville, one that could send an arrow from Cupid's bow into the heart of a young Hannah Abbott. Furthermore, in the Battle of Hogwarts, Neville was an absolute stud, so he likely impressed many female suitresses. The pair never ended up having any children, as far as we know, but we do know that they moved in together above the leaky cauldron, where Hannah worked as a landlady. As I mentioned above, many were upset that he didn't end up with Luna, but I guess it just wasn't meant to be. Draco builds a different legacy. Draco Malfoy's post-war story is interesting because it isn't built around dramatic redemption or heroic transformation. He doesn't become an aura, lead a resistance movement, or suddenly turn into one of the story's most admired figures. Instead, his future is much more believable. Draco grows up inside an ideology he didn't create. From childhood, he's shaped by blood purity, family pressure, and the belief that status determines worth. And by the end of the war, that worldview has clearly collapsed around him. His later choices reflect that shift. Draco goes on to marry Astoria Greengrass, a fellow pureblood who notably doesn't share the Malfoy family's obsession with blood status, and together they have a son, Scorpius. From what we know, Scorpius is raised very differently from the way Draco himself was raised. He's kinder, more open, and far removed from the old stereotype attached to the Malfoy name. And as the years went on, Draco slowly began to change too. His time with Astoria reshaped him. This is touched on by Rowling. He seemingly mellowed out a bit, leading a life of leisure instead of working to overturn the forces of light or establish dominion over muggles, like Lucius did. I imagine that Draco grew up to lead a modified version of his father's existence. Independently wealthy, without any need to work, Draco inhabits Malfoy Manor with his wife and son. I see in his hobbies further confirmation of his dual nature. Draco's adulthood isn't free of pain, however, as Astoria dies young from a blood-borne curse, leaving him to raise Scorpius alone. Percy finally finds balance. For most of the series, Percy Weasley is a bit of a black sheep. He values rules and ministry advancement so strongly that he distances himself from his own family at the very moment they need unity most. And that creates one of the more painful internal conflicts within the Weasley family, because Percy isn't evil, he just doesn't understand priorities. Fortunately, Percy does reconcile with his family during the Battle of Hogwarts and later builds a life of his own. He goes on to marry a witch named Audrey and has 2 daughters, Molly and Lucy, honouring his mother. What makes Percy's ending satisfying is that he abandons the pompous version of himself we saw earlier in the series. He matures, reconnects, and appears to carry forward both professional purpose and family loyalty. Percy finally becomes more complete than he was before. The next generation. Teddy is the son of Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, both lost in the Battle of Hogwarts, and Victoire is the daughter of Bill and Fleur Weasley, part of the extended family that repeatedly stood at the centre of the fight against Voldemort. Their relationship links 2 families shaped deeply by the war. They belong to a generation that inherits the consequences of the past without being trapped inside it, free to form relationships and live ordinary lives in a world that their parents helped secure. Oh yeah, and they get together. Delphini. One of the strangest and most controversial post-series revelations is that Bellatrix Lestrange and Voldemort had a daughter, Delphini. While most fans reject this part of canon, including me to some extent, the fact remains that the Cursed Child screenplay was greenlit and co-written by Rowling, so there has to be some element of truth to it. Voldemort viewed love as weakness, and people as means to an end, and this is exactly why the idea of him having a child feels contradictory to everything we know about his character. The timeline makes it even stranger. Based on the information given, Delphini would have been conceived sometime during the final phase of the war, most likely while Voldemort was operating from Malfoy Manor after returning to power. That places it in the middle of kidnappings, murders, the hunt for Harry, and preparations for the Battle of Hogwarts. In practical terms, it means one of the darkest periods in the series would have also been when this happened, which is part of why many readers found the reveal so difficult to accept. His daughter, Delphini, is meant to represent the possibility that evil can outlive the person who created it, and while this is part of canon, I find myself a bit reluctant to accept it, as do others. The Weasleys heal. The Burrow isn't just a house, it's the closest thing Harry ever finds to a true home throughout the series. Their home represents warmth, family, community, love, and respect. But that's also exactly why their losses hit so hard. They don't just lose Fred in the Battle of Hogwarts, they lose the ordinary life that had once defined their home, and this means that the family that spent years sheltering others suddenly has to rebuild its own foundation. Fortunately, they do make this happen. George eventually raises children, Ron builds a family with Hermione, Ginny does the same with Harry, Percy reconciles and moves forward, and Molly and Arthur remain the centre that holds everyone together. The post-war healing of the wizarding world happened through families learning to live with grief, communities restoring normal life, and homes reopening their doors after loss. And no family represents that truth more clearly than the Weasleys. Voldemort's name. For most of the series, Voldemort's name alone inspires fear. Most witches and wizards refuse to say it out loud, instead using names like you-know-who or he who must not be named. People weren't just afraid of him, they were even afraid of acknowledging him. Part of this is due to Voldemort's taboo curse, which is a spell that designates a word as a key to revealing the speaker's location. And ironically, Harry is one of the few people who regularly says Voldemort out loud, which often sets him apart from older generations who had lived through the First War. But after the battle and Voldemort's defeat, that wider fear of saying his name begins to break. People start saying Voldemort freely again. His defeat made him mortal, and saying his name made him ordinary, which meant that the darkest figure of their era was reduced at last to history. The Quidditch World Cup returns. One of the clearest signs that the wizarding world eventually stabilizes after the war is the return of sporting events. For example, the Quidditch World Cup. International tournaments require confidence. People need to believe it's safe to travel, governments need to cooperate, infrastructure needs to function, and communities need enough optimism to care about celebration again. So when future cups are held in 1998 with increased security, then again in 2002, 2006, 2010, and the heavily documented 2014 tournament, it signals far more than sport. It shows that wizarding life has regained enough normality to invest in competition, entertainment, and shared cultural experiences. Viktor Krum leaves the pitch. Viktor Krum enters the series as one of the wizarding world's biggest stars. He's an international Quidditch celebrity, the face of Bulgaria, and one of the most famous young athletes Harry ever encounters. To readers, Krum is tied closely to the Triwizard Tournament and to the pre-war world of Goblet of Fire, a time just before Voldemort's return changed everything. According to post-series material, Krum eventually retires from international Quidditch. On one level, that is simply the natural progression of any athlete's life, but symbolically, it also marks the passing of an era. Figures like Krum belong to Harry's generation of memory. Seeing them age out of the spotlight reminds us that time has genuinely moved on since the school years at Hogwarts. The world doesn't stay frozen around the heroes and celebrities of one moment, and even legendary seekers can't catch time forever. The Gobstones League. Not every sign of recovery after the war comes through major political events or dramatic victories. Sometimes it shows up in smaller details, like the National Gobstones League being held in Birmingham. Gobstones was always one of the wizarding world's more ordinary pastimes. It lacks the status of Quidditch, carries none of the danger of the Triwizard Tournament, and is hardly the sort of thing people build legends around. But the fact that a Gobstones League exists again tells us something useful about post-war wizarding Britain. There was room for leisure again, room for harmless competition, room for people to spend time on things that didn't involve survival, conflict, or crisis. It's just a great example that life goes on. Academic excellence returns. In 2006, the 87th Wizarding Schools Potion Championship takes place, showcasing the talent and skill of young witches and wizards in the art of potion making. It's a small detail, but a meaningful one. Events like this suggest a magical world that had regained stability. Schools were functioning, students were focused on learning, and excellence was being rewarded again. This is a sharp contrast to the years defined by the war. The London Five. It would be comforting to imagine that Voldemort's defeat solved every major problem in the wizarding world, but history rarely works that way. One post-war example is the mysterious case known as the London Five, a series of disappearances that baffled the Ministry of Magic. Highly skilled aurors vanished without clear evidence or explanation, creating fear and speculation throughout the magical community. The end of one great conflict doesn't freeze the world in place. Voldemort was the end of one chapter, but he was never going to be the end of history. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoy the content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live